All right, there we go. Now we're going to test some audio levels. All right, there we go. Now we're going to test some audio levels. Hey, that doesn't sound too bad. All right. Yeah, I boosted the hell out of our microphones, so
Okay.
hopefully, thank you. And we're live.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, just give me a moment. I'm
Doing a little bit more audio testing just to be sure that we're all set.
all right. Oh, ow, my shoulder. I'm an old man.
All that disc golfing,
Yeah.
axe throwing.
Axe throw. Yeah, I think it was the axe throwing. Hi, welcome.
To episode 4 of The More You Roll. At our new time for a little bit here, we're going to do some Sunday afternoon to accommodate my rehearsal schedule.
Yeah, we're doing it today at 1:30, but that doesn't mean it will be
Always at 1:30.
Just
Sunday
probably
afternoon.
Yeah, sometime during Sunday. I like it. We have some natural light.
I know. I was going to say it's so bright in here.
Yeah, it's good.
See
Cool.
the reflection in the back of it. Classy
All right.
stuff. But today we kind of talked about, we were thinking of 2 topics that do come up somewhat in our campaigns, at least the ones that I'm a part of with him. And those 2 topics are going to be railroading, which if you don't know what that means, that's okay, because I didn't know what that means. I had to have him explain that since it is not in my handbook, guys. It's not my homework. And then the other topic is combat difficulty. And we'll get more into what that means specifically, but both from a player point of view and a DM point of view, kind of what that means when you're coming to the table for combat.
Yeah. So, I guess just to start off, what is railroading? Railroading is something that happens, I believe, more often in custom campaigns, due to the nature that it's kind of like an open sandbox. Whereas if you're running some kind of like Wizards of the Coast campaign, like Tomb of Annihilation or, Rise of Tiamat, in those there is a specific goal that the party knows that they have to complete, and whether it's a time sensitive or something like that, they know they have to complete that goal. Whereas in a custom campaign, there may not be such a clear-cut goal. So it's very possible that instead of heading in the direction that the DM intends them to, they will get sidetracked or railroad the entire campaign and just go off and do a completely separate something.
And not even just doing something that unexpected. It could be as simple as you deciding not to pursue something that the DM thought you were going to pursue. So railroading is just kind of any deviation from what the DM expects and has planned for.
Yep. And I mean, railroading also does happen in the pre-written campaigns as well. I mean, we just had it happen a couple nights ago. We were running Tomb of Annihilation. I was expecting the party to go one way, and they went the exact opposite way.
Although just for some context, what he was expecting us to do was, and Tomb of Annihilation, for those of you who have played it or those of you who haven't, it's about a 75-day timeline that you're supposed to kind of complete this quest in order to save specifically the life that has set you out on it. And so he had planned for us to go to this specific fort, and then once we get there, the people needed help north, basically just where we had already traveled through, going back and clearing that out and getting there. And it was going to take about 14 days of our 75, where we'd already spent a good chunk of time even getting there. And so when we discussed it as a party, what we decided on as players is that, well, we just came that way. You guys have boats. The river runs north, the same direction you're trying to travel. We'll heal the people that you have here so you're able to travel, and know that we just went through here. Here's all the intel that we can give you, and we're not going to spend 2 weeks of our timeline going and doing this quest back the same way we came. Because in our heads, we were like, we have so much of the map left to explore that we just didn't want to take that kind of time to do that.
Yeah.
However,
Tomb of Annihilation is very interesting in that it's extremely open. The Chult is massive, and each hex takes a day, essentially.
and there are so
And there's
many
so many.
hexes.
So you're kind of like, you're limited to a certain amount of time. By the way, y'all still have that scroll of find the path that you didn't use, so you can use that to figure out where you need to go.
Well, we went to a plateau. So our thought is we're like, oh, cool, this is an 1,800-foot plateau. Let's go up that bad boy and see what we can see of the map. And somebody, a braggarty healing cleric decided that he was going to try to heal the evil hag. So, you never know what your players are going to do. He's full of himself. It's in character.
But anyway, going back to railroading. I had planned for them to do this fight. We switched from our physical table here to Roll20 to accommodate more players. Roll20 makes it really easy for a DM to kind of switch things on the fly. Prior to the session, I had prepared a very specific battle. And when they were like, no, we're not going to do that, and they went the other way, it was easy for me to adjust because I had source material.
And that's what he's talking about with the Wizards of the Coast existing campaigns. Oh, this episode, we're trying to leave our dog outside in the beautiful weather.
I can see him. I can see his little butt.
We have windows all around us so we can see him going back and forth.
So in the pre-written ones, you can technically get railroaded where they just decide not to do the main quest line. I don't think it happens as often because they want to finish the book.
Right.
But it does happen from time to time.
And as a player, you don't know, what the point is sometimes of some of these. Like in our head, we were like, 14 days, we don't have a lot of time. It's back the same way we came. And according to the people that we talked to, they have no information for us.
Yep.
That's what went into it from a player point of view. But from a DM point of view, I'm an inexperienced player, so could have thought about this, but we are in a party with experienced people. It's not just an experience. There might have been something on that quest that could have helped us with the rest of things to come. We just didn't do it.
Yep, which is fine. Like I said, Chult's massive, and you can't expect your players to hit all of the landmarks. But now going into a custom campaign, which is the complete opposite end and can be railroaded very easily, especially if the DM has not identified, the big bad, or like in our campaign, you don't know who the big bad is.
Nope, no idea.
Or even if there is one.
I kind of assume there isn't. Doesn't mean I'm right, by the way. Tee-hee!
But ours is a little more unique because it is mostly one-shots with different people. However, if we had a core group and there was a story arc, it would be very possible for the party to just not head from point A to point B. And as a DM, that improvisation is a little daunting because they're expecting you to have something prepared. And it doesn't take much. There's a lot of tools out there to help with combat encounters, NPC building, and everything like that. It's just you kind of have to be patient with the DM at that point. Or what the DM might do, and what I like to do, is that if you had something prepared, and your party decides to go the opposite way, take what you already have prepared, tweak it, and put it in their way again.
Sure. I was going to ask, this is just my point of view as a player, but I would expect that very rarely unless you have it, think about like when you're playing a video game. In some video games, they have little paths that are marked for you and, objective markers. So you kind of know where you're going and what you're supposed to be doing, reminders, that kind of thing. And obviously in a D&D game, you don't have all that. So it's kind of one of those things that I expect for a DM to have if he's needing people to go in a certain way, I kind of expect him to set it up that you eventually have to do that thing. And if not, then he or she should be totally prepared for whatever party decides. I mean, that's what makes it so daunting to me and difficult to be a DM, is that you can't predict what your players are going to do, especially if, the way that you narrate, which is like you want a DM who can build that story for you. Someone is like, all right, you've reached this place. What do you do? And that's your statement to go off of. And so now, as a party, you kind of have to figure out what you want to do, whether or not the DM wants you to do it. Whereas if you're getting really off track, I mean, do you course correct? How do you get people, if you need them to get from A to B and they're going over to J, how do you get them to B? How does that work?
Well, you usually would create some outside influence that would push them in the right direction. It wouldn't be a direct. It wouldn't be like, oh, you get a feeling that you need to head west, not east. It would be that, like, maybe you get a mysterious message through magical means. One of the characters, like, backstory kind of pops into play.
Okay.
And that is the inspiration to go, I think we're heading in the wrong direction.
Could it be as simple as adding an NPC that gives you a piece of information that
Absolutely.
you can then follow?
Yep. So,
or as subtle as, you can't go any further, there's a large boulder blocking your path,
like invisible walls in video games. No, but that's part of running the adventure. Is railroading can actually be pretty fun because it creates really interesting scenarios. When you don't prepare for something and you have to make it up on the fly, your players get more creative as well. So there are some interesting situations that might pop up that probably wouldn't have in the one you prepared, because if it gets railroaded, the players themselves are also creating a new situation. So you have a perspective of not only the DM but also the rest of the party. Okay. Whereas a prepared combat or interaction is solely the DM's creation.
Okay, that makes sense.
So railroading isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be detrimental to the party if, for instance, you're on a time limit or a timer.
Oops.
But it can be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, it was one of those things where in our heads, it didn't, for example, in the Tomb of Annihilation, it didn't make sense for us to do, at least from the conclusions we got to. It didn't make sense, and our party wasn't really inclined to do that. We're not necessarily like a lawful good party. I mean, we have a few members like that kind of keep things interesting to have that dichotomy, but we're not necessarily like out to help every individual person. We are focused on a quest, and all of us have individual drivers in our backstories that we aren't aware of for each other, but that are driving us to that end that overrides maybe, an outside random objective. But it did lead to a very interesting interaction with a hag, where my super arrogant cleric, who assumes he is the best healer to have healed in the healing world of healing, decided he was just gonna, like, without asking permission, try to heal her of her blindness.
Non-consensual healing.
Ooh, non-consensual healing. And now we have a lot of enemies coming down on us.
I mean,
but,
it had to happen.
A fleshy, weird thing. But yeah, as we talk about railroading, I would say railroading has a negative feel to it, like connotation as a word. But to me, that's what separates the really into role-playing DMs who can come up with stuff on the spot. That's what keeps me from wanting to try to be a DM, is I feel like that's the scare. I mean, apart from lack of experience, knowledge, et cetera, but there's a whole other aspect to it that requires on-the-fly creativity. And a good DM can do those things, and I think does react that way, or is able to, in a way that makes sense, drive a party back to where they're supposed to be. Like Miss Non-Subtle over here would like drop a random gnome that needs help, and his reward, if you help him, is giving you the clue that you need to get back on track. Like, I don't know. But
yeah, I don't remember where I saw it, but there's a term that I would prefer to use instead of railroading on pre-written campaigns, and it's called roller coasting.
Oh, I like that better.
Because you're still on the right track, you're just doing something different.
taking a few loop-de-loops.
So railroading in custom campaigns and roller coasting in pre-written ones.
And so would you say if you are someone who wants to try DMing and has never done it, that it's harder I'm thinking like pros and cons. If you take an existing campaign, apart from the fact that people might have done it already, but if you take an existing campaign, you have source material to fall back on. But like you said, it can be harder to correct roller coasting or whatever, to address it or work with it. In a custom campaign, you can pick things up and drop them in new places. You can flex a little bit more, but you don't have that source material. I mean, if you were wanting to try to be a DM, what would you recommend? And that may be a whole other
like for
DM special.
For a new DM?
Yeah, for a new DM. Like, what would you recommend? Is it take source material, tweak it for your custom whatever? I mean, how does that?
I wouldn't recommend a new DM to do a custom campaign right off the bat.
Okay.
Just because if they are brand new, even if they've been a player and have never DM'd, there are, you have to be able to build an encounter around the right difficulty rating. There's a lot of things that are more intense in a custom campaign versus being able to open a book. And, you said that you can drop an NPC in a custom. You can do that in a pre-written one too. You can just make someone up on the fly and said, like the Ghost of Christmas Past, and just have them point in the opposite direction. And the NPC doesn't have to be significant in the story, but you can still
use
do
it to
that.
course correct.
Yeah. But I would pretty much recommend new DMs start with a pre-written one, or even like not even necessarily a Wizards of the Coast pre-written total campaign, but if you go on to so when I use dmsguild.com, they have a lot of free written source material, adventures, and they look similar to a official book.
Okay.
So that would probably be where you want to start. I know that we have someone who wants to try DMing, I believe, and that's what I recommended.
Okay.
Not you.
No, yeah. Eventually, I may take a stab at it, but we'll see. I have a very experienced friend who wants to help with some of the, we'll do. I think we should do a whole episode on DMing in general. Bring in some of our friends who are really good DMs and kind of flex a little bit more into what that means, because it is a cool part of it. But there is so much that we don't see behind the screen, so to speak, apart from him like wanting to kill us with 20,000 D6 fireball damage.
It's just 8.
Oh, just 8. Just TPK for lower level characters. That it's daunting, but I feel like it's kind of like any acting or any other thing where there's kind of two sides to a table. When you play the other side, you get a little bit more perspective on what you might want or should do as a player that you really didn't think about. So I think that's kind of a cool thought to it, is like if you take that chance to kind of go on the other side, so to speak, you start to realize there are things you can do as a player that you may not have noticed before, right? I mean,
yeah. Whenever we do that DM special, we have
bringing a panel.
There's 4 of us that DM. And I know, I'm sure all of them would love to come on. I don't know if we'd be able to get them all on at the same time. But yeah, what we might do, we might sprinkle in some DM specials where we, throw ideas back and forth, and every DM is different. So every DM is going to have, the rules are kind of fluid. So the way
it's like the pirate code,
more
guidelines,
more like guidelines. The way one DM plays, it could be completely opposite from the other one. And you know what? Generally, the other one also has good ideas that you can incorporate into your own campaign.
Sure. Yeah.
So we'll figure that out later.
I prefer roller coasting to railroading. But in general, I think that's just one of those things that both as a player and a DM can lead to some unexpected weirdness, fun, disaster, whatever. So it's just something to be aware of. Personally as a player, I kind of feel that, I have no idea, especially if I have no idea where the story is going. I do put the burden on the DM if we are way off track or something, that I'm expecting him to give us some help. I'm saying him because he is the DM I play with most, to give us some help to get us on track, because as a player, I don't know what direction I'm supposed to be going. That's part of, that's part of the adventure.
Yep.
So if it is getting really off track, I put the burden on the DM to get us back. But also players, I wouldn't just start like doing whatever came to mind, obviously going out of your way to.
Yeah. That's why I'm excited for our next campaign that starts up a little bit later this year. Hopefully that we might be able to stream.
Yeah, I think we should stream it.
Hopefully. We got to figure out how to do the AV in this room.
Logistics, yeah.
But that one, since it's going to be a consistent party, and I
start with that session 0 we talked about.
Yeah, we won't have to do the one shot where people can move in and out and not have to worry about missing anything. It's going to be interesting because for the first probably 5 sessions, you won't have much of a direction. And the direction that the players take in that beginning kind of sets the tone for the rest of the campaign.
Okay.
As I'm writing it, I know, I kind of work backwards. I know what the end goal is, and I know where the players are going to start, but everything in the middle is a variable. So I kind of wait.
It's a lot to write.
Yeah, I kind of wait until the party, I'll write the first few sessions. Mm-hmm. I'll see what the party ends up doing. And then once they find their path, I draw around that path. So, there's 100 different ways to get to the end.
That sounds like so much fun to write.
Yeah. That's why it's taken me forever to.
But it'll be cool. And I'm sure you'll see some of the things we talk about here pop up in there. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that we wanted to talk about, apart from roller coasting, because I do prefer that term, is combat difficulty. So
you want to start with the story and then we'll go into
yes. So a great illustration, I think, that kind of propelled a discussion, because he and I had a discussion even after that particular session. So in our one-shot group, a lot of the players are new. We do have some experienced players kind of in the mix that help, in general, every person play their character better, because we may have questions or whatever, or they're kind of helping influence and keep us on track a little bit more because they know more what they're doing. But in this particular one shot, we were kidnapped by people, pirates, somewhere in that, pirates. Slavers, kidnapped, classic. And no matter what we did, we wasted a lot of time early in the session because we were trying to prevent being kidnapped. Like, we knew something was off. I mean, we had people barricading their doors and like trying to stay awake, or like take watches even inside of a hotel, because we knew something was off. We didn't realize we were gonna get kidnapped, but we knew something was off, and it didn't matter, which we didn't know at the time, because basically he needed for us to get kidnapped and brought on this ship as prisoners in order for the story to continue. So whether you were a furbolg who barricaded a door and was standing there armed, he just sent in swarms and swarms and swarms of people, to the point that like nothing you did mattered. Like, you were getting kidnapped. And so for a timed session, and I mean timed in the sense of real world hours, that we had a set number of hours everyone was available, we wasted a lot of session time kind of trying to prevent the inevitable. Now, as a little bit, this was early on, a little bit more experience looking back, I realized that he, as a DM, had given us signs it was inevitable, but we just didn't pick up on them. So then we're on this ship, and because we're prisoners and chained up, we don't have any weapons. And again, we're very low level. We're level 2? I think it was level 2. Level 2. So not too strong. Level 2, a group of players who had not really played that much and were playing new characters in the first place. And we didn't have weapons. So luckily, my character, the rogue, was able to lockpick everyone's chains off. And, we start going upstairs to initiate escaping, which launches into a very large combat against armed guards with swords and creatures, like panther-y creatures, kind of.
There was a displacer beast and a panther, I think.
Yeah, creatures that with fangs and slashy bits and things like that. And so, the big crux of it is, from my point of view as a player, I felt it was unnecessarily difficult, because at such a low level, Anyone with spells wasn't really able to do a lot of damage because we don't really have good spells. Unarmed, we're not doing a lot of damage, and also they were armed. Like maybe if it was hand-to-hand combat or something, like we surprised them so none of them had their weapons or something like that, it might have felt a little more even. But every single turn, everyone in the party was down and then would spend their turn trying to heal, revive, and get back up just in time to be knocked back down again by the number of enemies that were there, let alone the creatures that were doing a heck of a lot of damage. I mean, I honestly, if we ran out of time in that session and he kind of narrated us getting out of it a little bit, but I don't think that we would have survived. I think we would have lost multiple people, which, especially when you're dealing with new players and it's a brand new thing, I think I would have been disheartened. It would have been disheartening for me to be killed in the second session. Mm-hmm. So I think, there was some frustration on my end as a player that part of it's an experience. I call it user error, player error, that like he was giving me signs, especially my character as a lock picking person. I was supposed to go up to the captains and like pick the lock and get our weapons and come back to, and like I tried it once, and when I didn't succeed, I assumed I wasn't supposed to. And now I know there's different language he would have used if I was not allowed to versus unable to, or didn't get a high enough roll. Yeah. So that's kind of where this conversation stemmed from, is I was like, how do you decide how difficult something's going to be? And in the moment, if it is an impossible situation, how do you then, as a DM, start to course correct so you don't have a TPK session 2 of a campaign?
Yep. And combat is, I believe, harder than storytelling. And not the combat itself, not the fighting itself, but building a combat encounter.
Sure.
Because what you have to do is you have to take the collective level of your party and build something that would be challenging, but not too challenging. And you also don't want the entire party just to sweep through the big battle that you tried. So you have to and it has to fit within your story.
Right.
It's got to make sense. So you can't just pull random monsters and humanoids and throw them in the mix.
And when you say challenging,
yeah,
you've given me an explanation of challenging before. What do you see as challenging, DM?
Well, I think the biggest issue is putting like creative monsters into these fights. Monsters that generally I like to throw in something that they've never seen before. Which is cool because I get to 3D print a new mini. And
that's
put it
why
on the
he
table.
does it. So we can 3D print new minis.
But the thing for me is that my definition of a challenging combat encounter, challenging for the players, is one where they succeed, but one or two might go unconscious or might get close to death, because I feel that death within the game itself isn't really, almost like it isn't respected enough, because we can just bring them back, which is true, but not necessarily at a low level, and not necessarily in a situation where you don't have the components or you don't have a cleric. So that my goal is to try and knock one person out, maybe just unconscious, not kill them. That way it adds a little bit more difficulty for the players, because not only are they fighting the monsters, but they're also trying to heal someone else.
Right.
And then at the same time, you have to go into the mind of your combatants and say, what would they actually do? Because if you have a player fall unconscious, generally speaking, the monsters or whoever you're fighting isn't going to go for that unconscious person, because they're already down and they're
no
not
longer
a threat. Yeah. The only time I usually ever have that happen is if it's like an incidental thing.
Mm-hmm. Puppy's jumping on the window.
Yeah. I see you, bud.
Oh
man, he looks. Oof.
Ooh.
I don't like that window. We need a big
screen for that.
Yeah, big screen for that.
Anyway.
So there are tools online that you can use to build the encounters, and basically what you do is you just put in the average party level, the like the difficulty rating, like easy, challenging, hard, impossible. And it'll basically spit out something like you should send X amount of enemies at these DCs. And then you can modify it to, send out less lower level enemies so you can have one higher level enemy.
To your definition earlier, to what you were saying earlier, picturing a person going unconscious. So for example, in this battle, we had multiple players go unconscious or almost die every turn.
Mm-hmm. That was too hard.
So, and I think part of that too, you also have to factor in, or I assume you also have to factor not just going into your player's mind, but understanding what your players know as far as experience. If you've got a group of inexperienced combatants at low levels that really kind of don't know what to do or what they should be doing, that should factor into that ability, or I guess like evaluation or mathematical equation to kind of figure it out. And one of the things that I think is daunting from a DM point of view, I'm not sure how you do this. So what happens if you're in a battle and your expectation is difficult, death is a consequence, but you're seeing you're seeing that your players are like way overwhelmed and like are not, and it's meant to be doable. Mm-hmm. But at that point, like he narrated us through it because the session ended where he was like, at some point, your rogue went upstairs and was successfully able to pick the lock and get the weapons and bring it downstairs. And I was like, shoot, that was what I was supposed to do, because I didn't totally understand what my role was as a rogue in that group.
What I probably would have done in that specific scenario,
yeah,
because this would be a good thing. Something that you had done on that boat had freed some of the people that were chained up. Yeah, we had freed some slaves. Yeah. So what I would have probably done, without pushing you to lockpick again, at some point I'd be like, you hear an explosion from on top of deck, and you go upstairs and see that one of the escapees had planted a powder keg and blown the door open on the captain's quarters.
Awesome. Okay.
So if it's going one way or the other, and you need to like progress through, and you notice that your players are having a difficult time, outside influence, one, you need to get their attention, and two, you need to make the battle more accessible to them.
Okay.
Whether that's a friendly that comes in and helps you fight.
Okay.
Or some kind of natural. I don't want him on the screen. Hold on. Give me a second. I'll be right back.
Technical pupper issues. But yeah, in that battle, and I do think that there specifically was more player error than he is used to DMing, because a lot of the groups I think that he works with and plays with are a little more experienced than we are. For example, the lockpicking. That was apparently very instrumental in our success, because even if he brought in someone to help us, the way they would have helped us was blowing the door off the captain's quarters so that we could get our weapons. I misinterpreted. I did. That was my first thought. I was like, I can go get the weapons because I just lockpicked everybody's chains. So I, used my turns. It took multiple turns because you can only move so much. But I used my turns to go up the stairs, over to the captain's quarter, and then attempt to pick the lock. I tried it twice, and both times my rolls were decently high. It was like a 19. It wasn't a 20 or higher, but it was like a 19, 18 kind of deal. And I didn't succeed. And I thought that meant, I was like, man, that's almost a 20, whereas like picking the chains on our thing was pretty easy. Obviously, the difficulty rating, if I'd known better, is a lot harder to break into the captain's quarters than it is to take off our little dinky chains. And I didn't realize the language he was using was telling me that. It wasn't like you tried and your lockpicks melted, or you tried and there was some sort of invisible force stopping you from being able to do it. Something like that would have clued me I'm not supposed to, versus me just failing the rolls and I needed to keep trying. That was what I was supposed to do. And that's player error. I didn't understand that the language he's using does make a difference.
Yeah, well,
in what it means.
You were also an experienced player, so you may not have known that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the combat difficulty, ranges greatly between DMs. Some DMs want to make the battles fun. Some want to make it, it's even more difficult than starting the battle is. If there's like an army of people that you're up against, the DM's got to keep track of each one of those. And so you can't really swarm the party with 30 enemies. I mean, you could.
Unless they're like really weak.
Right.
Or
It would be something where like a cleric could wipe out a ton of undead with one spell kind of thing. But I like the combat that's challenging enough that the players try to do something a little bit more creative than just whack them with a sword. Create environments that are usable. So, for instance, like if you're in a tavern, and you get disarmed, you pick up a mug and toss it at one of the enemies, and glass breaks and shards get in his eyes, and he has disadvantage or something like that.
Okay. Note to self.
So, but you can't always expect your players to be that creative. So, what you might do is on the DM's turn, while he's moving his enemies around, you might want to subtly, like, say the orc went behind the bar and knocked a bunch of stuff over, like kind of tell them that there are environmental things that they can use. Or, if you need a better vantage point, you can use your acrobatics to get up into the banister or the rafters and shoot from the rafters or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see, because there is there's a lot of stuff in the DMG about combat, but it's usually just kind of like how to, not and how to run the combat versus how to make a challenging combat.
But I think that's, kind of as you talked about when you're putting it together, if I understand correctly, because this is new for me, kind of hearing some of the DM side of how this is built, is you look at your party's level and their abilities at that level.
Yep.
You kind of have to have a knowledge of it, especially if you're in a campaign where you've worked with them a little bit before, so you kind of have an idea of how they might make their moves. And that's part of that's background too. Like, for example, if you're in a campaign with a husband-wife duo and the husband's a healer, more than likely if his wife goes down, like that's the first person he's going to heal, even if they're not the closest or not, it's not the fastest move or whatever. So there's like little drivers like that might influence how you're going to look at it. Player experience.
Yeah.
And then objective, like if you want to have a big bad versus lots of little bads, or if you want to build new monster 3D prints.
It's so fun. I have a drawer full of them.
He does. And he'll pull them out and we're like, shh. How many arms are on that thing?
Just keep pulling them out behind the DM
How
screen.
many claws? Yeah.
1, 2, 3,
And
16,
part of that, I think,
17.
too, and this kind of fact, we talked a little bit about this, about the session 0. Again, player experience. When I first decided to play as a cleric in Tomb of Annihilation, and I'm kind of filling that healer role, part of my motivation for that was, as a newer person, I didn't want to be the one people count on in combat as far as doing damage, because I didn't really know, like, spellcasting, as we talked a little bit about, is complicated. It's not going to be a wizard and not know how to wizard, But the cleric also has kind of an overwhelming number of spells available that I didn't really anticipate beyond just like heal. And now that I know better, kind of in our more recent sessions, the spells that I've picked are shield, are boosting people's ability. Like my kind of first thought is whenever we start combat, a great thing for me to do is bless people. I mean, and that's not always the sexy glory role, that support, but that's instrumental. I mean, not every archetype of character is made to do a lot of damage. So necessarily in a battle, understanding how your character is most advantageous to the party and to combat is a good way for you to be prepared, because that's part of, I assume, what you look at. If you're looking at a party full of rogues, he might design a battle a little differently than if you have a well-balanced party that's got your tanks and your spellcasters and your up-close people and your heal. It's going to be a little bit different. And I think that's really important for a party to figure out during that session 0 is, do we have all the archetypes that we need to be successful? You don't want too many support and no damage dealers. You don't want one, you have to find that balance. And that seems really difficult, to find the right balance Does the DM help guide that a little bit? If you start building out for a big campaign, he's gonna be like, hey, you don't have a healer.
Yeah, absolutely. I try not to. I think I said this in a couple episodes ago. I would never pressure a player to pick a class they don't want to play, because at that point they're not going to have fun. However, there are certain roles that need to be filled to have a consistently, winning team. Tank, healer, DPS. At least fill those roles.
Sure.
They don't. It doesn't have to be a paladin, cleric, and a rogue.
Right.
You can have your druid healer, or your paladin can end up being a healer, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, or you can build a DPS cleric if you wanted to. Like, you can build it. You can build your characters around any way you want. However, during that session 0, when everyone sits down and says, "Okay, what type of character do you want to play?" Don't think about race, don't think about class or anything like that. What do you want to accomplish in this campaign without revealing any of your backstory and that kind of stuff? And then that way the DM can say, okay, well, if you want to be in their face and do a lot of damage, you have a couple different options. And then you kind of get 2 or 3 options from each person.
And then kind of craft your party from there.
Exactly.
And I think thinking about combat, of course, is a good way to evaluate your party success rate, because, even this happens to me all the time. My character actually both my characters are high charisma characters that I have right now. Just because I'm high in charisma does not mean that I'm ever going to make the right rolls. Because at the end of the day, you could in general be a charismatic player, and you could roll natural ones all day long on any of those encounters. So thinking about success in the role playing, you can make success in how you role play your character. I think personally, like, now that I know a little bit better, I'm going to be thinking about what I want to accomplish from a combat point of view as a party, and how I need to play that character. And once you do set that up, realize that if you're not a DPS person, that's okay. You're still going to fill a very, very valuable role in the party, and know how you should play that character to the party's advantage.
Yeah, there's been a lot of times where we've had combat encounters, and I've had some players get bored because they just do the same thing over and over again, which I understand. If you're a low-level sorcerer, you have let's say low-level warlock, you have your Eldritch Blast, right? And that's kind of like your bread and butter, and that's just kind of what you end up doing every fight. I'm going to stay 100 feet back and just blast the shit out of them at low levels. That makes sense because you're learning your character, and the only response I can say to that is just be patient, because eventually you'll start leveling up and learning new spells. I believe it's built specifically that way so you aren't overwhelmed
with options. We did a one-shot not that long ago, just for fun, with high-level characters, just because we wanted to have like a really interesting game experience with a group of friends that do and don't play D&D very often. And I picked a druid because I've never done one before, and I wanted to be a wild shifter. Is that the right? Wild shaper, whatever. I wanted to turn into a large saber-toothed tiger and pounce on things. And so, it was really overwhelming to look at the number of options. Like, it was very difficult to kind of dive in with that. Even as my rogue in Crimson Gauntlet, I do the same thing every turn. Rush up, slash with rapier, hopefully do a lot of damage based on all my party things, get a lot of cool bonuses, and then disengage and leave. And I do that every time. But it's a vital role.
Yeah, but what a DM can do to make it more interesting for the player, kind of going back to that second session, disarm them, so they have to come up with a creative solution. Don't disarm them forever. Make sure that they still have viable options, but you can say, you got your sword knocked out of your hand, so you either have to go back and get it, or you have to improvise a weapon. And that's part of not just building the encounter itself around the players and the enemies, but building the environment specifically around everyone. Because if you're just in an open field, there's not much you can do other than pick up a rock. And generally I don't think we've had any open field
Not really.
encounters.
I
It's
don't
usually
think so.
if it has, there's usually like ruins or broken down buildings that people can hide behind or find stuff in. So
And also, I get frustrated, but like, this is like the popcorn kettle black. But don't don't feel that like it's frustrating to roll poorly ever at any point, and especially so. I'm sure I feel this way in combat because you've waited for your turn. You're like all excited, you have a plan, and then you roll like shit and you can't do anything. And that happens all the time. It's not something I react. I'm like, oh man, that's like kind of embarrassing. Whoops. But like it happened. That's the whole point. That's if you knew you were going to succeed every time, it would be a completely different game.
Yep.
And so, don't get disheartened. And again, don't get disheartened if you're not the character, the glory character that's doing a bunch of damage, because every person in that party plays a specific and different role, which may change per encounter based on the circumstances. Like he said, if there was in that specific campaign, depending on the characters, if we were all unarmed, but we got Eldritch Blast, like she doesn't need to be armed. She could do it. She just wasn't in that particular session. And so there's going to be times when something that you didn't realize was extra valuable is extra valuable.
Yep.
So.
I think that building combat, I personally like building the story more than I like building the combat, but I also like the roleplay aspect more than the combat in the game itself when I'm playing. But combat is half the battle.
I love combat.
Combat is half the battle. And there are a lot of players who prefer combat over role playing, which makes sense. So you have to make it interesting for them to kind of make up for the fact that they may not be as involved in the role playing part, and you want to keep them interested in the campaign.
Like tell such an engaging story that as they're leaning in to listen, they can get scared by their wife walking right behind them.
I was proud of that.
That was so funny. Yeah, he was leaning in. Tyler was in the middle of like this really, really well. He likes the story. Really great, engaging story moment. And this happens to be one where we're on video chat, and so all of us can see his wife is like walking up behind him to like tap him on the sholders and talk to him for a second.
Not my wife, one of the players.
One of the players, yes. And he's like really intensely focused, and I kind of assumed he saw it because dressed in bright blue, it's on camera. And she goes in to talk to him, and he's like, and like jumps, rips his headphones off. That was fun.
But it made me like. I felt better about it because I'm like, that particular person enjoys combat way more than the RP, but he was getting into the RP.
Oh yeah.
So I was proud of that moment.
I do like combat because I like to run up and smash things with swords.
I know, and I felt bad because our last session didn't have any. It would have if you didn't roller coaster away from it.
But it's gonna start with a really terrifying battle next session. Woo!
Yeah.
Don't piss off a hag.
I don't know if you pissed her off. I think she's just hungry.
And we're delicious.
Maybe
we'll find out. Well, we won't find out because we're gonna win. We're gonna be there anyway. Yeah.
But as far as continuing on the challenging thing, on the opposite side, instead of bringing the challenge rating down, you got sometimes bring it up, and you can seamlessly do that by adding more creatures kind of on the fly. So what I've done probably more times than I'm willing to tell you, where I just see that I did not build the encounter well enough to challenge the players. I'll be like, suddenly,
from the heavens, you hear a great screeching sound. It flies down. Yeah.
So I'll add more monsters.
That's why you do. Yeah.
But there's been. I would say probably 10 times where I've added more creatures or a new difficulty aspect to the combat round. And it could be anything from just be like, you had more zombies walking through the door that you didn't see before, or you're in a castle and all the fighting, the old castle, the floor falls out from underneath you and you land in a basement with, oozes or something like that.
Don't like that. Nope.
I would say I have to ramp up more than I need to bring down.
That's good. And sometimes I'm sure that happens because we're more successful than, like, it just so happens everyone's rolling really well
Yep.
and we're just kind of like cruising through the combat. And I agree that it should be difficult enough that it's not boring, because combat's exciting. I like when there's enough of a challenge that I have to work for it, but like I don't want to die. And I say die in the final sense, not die as in go unconscious and start rolling. And also, you know, again, pot calling kettle black, but if your character does go down and you do ultimately die, like your character perishes, that's all role based. It's not necessarily anything that you did or you should be embarrassed of. That's the chance of rolling. You know, I mean, when you have to make those saves, it's not like you can be like, all right, dice, roll what I need you to. That's what you can hope for, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And so I'm waiting for it to happen to me so I can actually own up to being able to have done this maturely. But in general, it's not something to be like, oh my God, this is the most embarrassing. This party is never going to want to play with me again. Hell, it's an opportunity for you to create a new character. Now that you've played with one, you could, for all you know, it's their twin. Haha.
Yeah.
You know, there's wiggle room in there, but it's a part of the story. It's gonna happen. I have not had it happen yet, but it is going to happen at some point. I'm kind of hoping my man-whore cleric will die soon.
I mean,
I've got some really fun backstory characters for him, or other characters.
One of our clerics got swallowed by a giant turkey and almost died.
Yeah, he did.
And luckily, I think you had the killing blow.
Yeah, I think he did. Oh, yeah, because he couldn't cast a spell from the inside or something.
He was suffocating. And,
I went for the belly.
Yep.
Or something.
Sliced him open.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was on his last death save, and you did the killing blow.
The swoop. Pirate. Swashbuckling rogue. That'll do some damage.
But as far as combat difficulty goes, I would say just stick to the formula, or start with the formula and have a backup plan on either ends of it. So if it's too hard, create an environmental thing that brings it down that feels natural. If it's too easy, add a couple more monsters. It can be really easy if you do plan a little bit more ahead.
Okay. I feel like that's like the entire like tagline for DMing, like have a backup plan.
Yeah.
That's today's episode. Have a backup plan.
Exactly.
Whether they're roller coasting or coasting through combat or dying in combat, have a backup plan.
Yeah. Sometimes the backup plans need backup plans. Plan D.
D and D?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, let's see here. What else are we looking at? Reloading, combat difficulty. There's not much else that I can... Well, there's probably a lot of stuff I can talk about.
We don't want to get too many topics in one episode.
We're getting close to our end time.
Yeah.
Rewarding your characters for their combat.
I always wonder how that works.
Yeah, so there's treasure tables in the books.
Okay.
So it could be random, or you could have prepared the treasure ahead of time. It could be something like, you know, the big bad had a really nice sword or some really nice armor, and that was your reward for winning. And that also has to reflect on the challenge rating of the battle. If it was really hard, obviously it's a better payout. Sometimes I'll throw fights in where there's basically no payout because
it was such an easy fight.
It was such an ezy fight. It kind of correlates with how much XP your party would be getting from that fight. And generally, if it's usually like maybe one magical item where the party's kind of got to figure out who gets it.
Who gets it, yeah. And if you are going to do a magical item or something like that, obviously understanding what would be beneficial to people in your party, that's our puppy alarm on time here.
Yeah.
What would be beneficial to your party is instrumental in picking a good reward. But I think that is a good place to end it.
Solo, it's okay, bud.
For today. But, you know, have a backup plan. We'll see you guys next week.
We'll see you next Sunday, hopefully.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.